A 17-year-old boy named Randy Gardner decided for his science project to stay awake for 11 days a night and observe what happens. Randy's mind started to malfunction and he began to tire. He eventually became irritable, nauseous, and forgetful. He was hallucinating constantly, severely disorientated, paranoid, and experiencing memory loss. On his 5th day, he began to show symptoms of Alzheimer's disease. On the last 4 days of his experiment, Randy lost motor function, his fingers trembled, and his speech slurred. Yet, on his last day, he was able to beat the men at pinball 100 times consecutively.
Most of us have heard of what insomnia is, but what is fatal familial insomnia? How is it different and how can it affect you? Well, first of all, fatal familial insomnia is a rare human genetic disorder that only affects about 20 families worldwide. So, how is it different, you may ask? The disease can cause mental health issues such as fever, tremors, sweating, or uncontrollable muscle spasms. Sometimes people will experience anxiety and depression. And how it can affect you in the long run? Well, if the insomnia becomes permanent, the severity can lead to the person becoming mentally ill, or even for the patient to fall into a coma and possibly die.
Often called the father of sleep research, William Dement theorized that the sleeping brain is locked in a vicious biological combat. One army is composed of neurons, hormones, and other chemicals that keep you awake, called the circadian arousal system. The other army, composed of brain cells, hormones, and chemicals that put you to sleep, called the homeostatic sleep drive, are in constant battle, trying to either keep you awake or asleep. The longer you are asleep, the greater probability becomes that the homeostatic sleep drive will cede. This fight is sometimes referred as the opponent process model. Dement also noticed that these forces don't always battle at night. Sometimes it can also occur in the mornings. He also noticed that there is never a final victor, just a constant battle where one loses and then eventually the other wins.
Larks versus owls versus hummingbirds. Larks are considered as early birds who tend to be awake by 6 a.m. and go to sleep by 9 p.m. Larks report being most alert around noon and feel most productive at work a few hours before they eat lunch. Owls, on the contrary, are considered the night birds. They tend to not be awake before 10 a.m. and they don't go to sleep no earlier than 3 in the morning. The interesting fact about larks is that they tend to consume less coffee. However, owls tend to consume lots of coffee. For larks, their favorite mealtimes is breakfast, and for owls, favorite mealtimes is dinner. Larks and owls cover only about 30% of the population. The rest are called the hummingbirds. Hummingbirds tend to be a little bit of more owl, a little bit more of larks, or they are some in between. While reading, I found it interesting what the analogy of larks as early birds and owls as night birds was, and began to compare myself to see which one I was considered as. I came to the conclusion that I am an owl. I found it amusing how I tend to prefer dinner over breakfast because of the fact that I'm not a morning person. Statistics show that larks tend to sleep a lot better than owls. After a period of time without sleep, a person tends to experience what researchers call sleep debt. I personally can relate to this because I experience it. Throughout the summer, I always went to bed late and then would wake up almost at noon. However, no matter how much I sleep, I wake up just as tired because I'm not able to gain sleep back from what I lost from the previous night.
With Randy Gardner as an example, we now know that sleep loss affects the brain in many ways. Some of the effects of sleep loss are reduced attention span, a reduction of quantitative skills, a loss of logic reasoning, a loss of executive function, memory loss, moodiness, gross motor skills, and loss of fine motor control. Knowing these effects can help you in catching the symptoms of sleep loss and also help you in knowing if you need more sleep.
As a future profession as a nurse, it is important for nurses to protect their own health and safety as well as the safety of their patients. Signs and symptoms nurses tend to have when they don't get sleep is increased negativity and irritability, bad mood throughout the shift, lack of concentration, lack of energy, or feeling drained, short-term memory loss, forgetting very small things, and poor communication. Communication is very important because nurses are the ones who interact with the patients more. The patients depend on the nurses to take care of them the proper way. It is important to communicate with the patients with everything that is going on and record everything that is done while in care of the patient.
Knowing the effects of sleep helps me with my profession because I can catch the symptoms on my students and help them have a better night of sleep. I'll also make sure that I don't overload my students' workload so that the only option is not an all-nighter, but sleep. Also, for me to know the effects helps with me not overworking myself too much, pulling all-nighters because that won't help me prepare for the next school day. With less sleep, I can become more irritable and unfocused, which is not fair for my students. In conclusion, here are some summary points. Sleep well, think well. Sleep varies from person to person. Not everyone is the same. Not everyone sleeps the same amount of hours and not for the same amount of time. But your brain is never asleep. It is always working regardless if you're physically asleep. Do not sleep debt. Loss of sleep hurts you. You should take naps. They are good for you, whether you sleep for 26 minutes, 30 minutes, or 45s. It's natural for you to feel sleepy in the afternoon, and it's natural to take naps.